Question of the hour. What do you think helped improve your D&D game the most?
For me, it was when I stopped plotting my games and started planning them. So let's discuss DM tips, plotting versus planning.
I'm Nerdarchy Ted.
I'm Nerdarchy Dave. Welcome to Nerdarchy, for nerds, by nerds.
So do we plot this video or plan this video?
So we're going to jump into this video and we're talking about plotting and planning and which one should you be doing in your games. It actually came up during one of our daily live chats on the Nerdarchy Live YouTube channel, which there's a link down in the description. You can check that out if you're into hearing us talk to and interview other people and do live stuff and long form content. But I was talking to Guy Sklanders from How to Be a Great GM, and basically, like, he just had done a Kickstarter for another, like, How to GM book, right? And I was like, hey, you already did one of these a while back. Has anything changed? Is it all the same stuff? I was just teasing him. I'm good friends with Guy. He's an awesome individual and an amazing YouTuber. You should check out his YouTube channel. He's got great advice. But, he had an epiphany, and, it was around plotting and planning. And it kind of changed how he was running his games and how he was prepping his games. So that really got us thinking, and we even did a live chat about this where me and Doug discussed it a bit. But I figured we'd go into a more like holistic breakdown of how you're doing things, how we're doing things, and how this might benefit your D&D games.
So with this, we're going to talk about what is plotting, what is planning, what are the pros and cons of each of these approaches, so that you can make the best decision and see how you want to handle this in your own games. If you're looking for a way to help out Nerdarchy to keep making videos like this, as well as all the awesome content over on nerdarchy.com, why not check us out over on Patreon and support us over there?
As a special reward, you will receive 5e content for both GMs and players alike that you can drop right in your game. We are making drop-in encounters, print and play magic cards that we create from magic items that we make, spells, feats, subclasses, races, all kinds of things, even a chance to game with Nerdarchy. There will be a link down in the description, as well as one of these cards up here. You can click on that for a free Patreon sampler download. You can see what it is where you support us over on Patreon.
First up is plotting, and plotting is where we as the DM create and control the plot so that we know where the story is expecting to go.
More often than not, you're also trying to plot the outcome as well. Now, we can go into some pros and cons of this style of prep work for you as a GM before we get into planning. One of the pros to plotting is everything that's going to happen. At least that's the theory anyway. But, no great plan or plot survives first contact with the players.
This is going to allow you to have less need for improv if you already have the idea of what's going on, what the player's choices are going to be. It makes things a lot easier for you to prep and plan.
And you can go into your games feeling much more confident, feeling that you've prepared everything that you're possibly going to ever need for the session.
So with all of these things, it fits very much like a pre-written adventure. You've got the ability to write it. And while there are choices that could be made, for the most part, you're on, a loose, rail system of, okay, you go down this path and this is what you encounter and this is where the story goes. And there's nothing wrong with this particular style, but if you are more interested in a more open world, sandboxy type style, you might not want to go in this kind of direction because there are some cons that go along with it. As I kind of briefly mentioned, going with this style can feel very railroaded because there's not a whole lot of choice. I can't go left and right in this place. Straight is the only option.
Oftentimes I find in this kind of scenario, there are less opportunities for the players to contribute to the story, and sometimes they don't feel like they quite have as much agency with the narrative.
Losing control of the narrative from a player standpoint can actually, be very harmful. And that leads into the next thing. If I'm not part of the narrative, then I might lose interest in the game because what my player says and does might not actually affect the story in any way, shape, or form. So why am I even here?
Yeah, so, if you're a GM that, likes this style of preparation where you plot everything out, you try and figure out every possible outcome, the solution to every problem that the players are going to going to, encounter. These adventures tend to be very much linear and maybe even railroady, which, may work for your style of play, may not work for your style of play. And, one of the problems that you're going to find too is you're probably going to be less prepared to improv when it comes up, and it will come up.
Now, there's nothing to say that this style is wrong. I mean, I've run a 12-session story arc twice now, with 5th edition that was very much like this. The players had choice, but I knew going into my plotting for the next session what their choices were going to be. So I was able to prepare exactly what they wanted and what they were going to do. But the overarching story of what was happening in the grand scheme was discussed in the session 0, and the players were making choices, but when it came to my material, there was not, well, let's go left. It was, oh, sorry, we're going right at this point in time, or you're going straight. So it worked, but it's not something I typically do often.
Yeah, it requires more buy-in from the players and them to decide to do the thing that you've kind of agreed to do. And it also helps if you have a session 0 so that they understand what's expected of them and they do that. But that being said, too, I also feel like you're a very fluid GM. If we went and threw you a curveball, which I'm sure we have even in those things, you may have plotted things out. I think your plotting is actually more like the planning we're going to talk about, but because you adapt and you'll change. The plotter GM oftentimes is not willing to do that, and more often than not, like they're going to do everything they can to get things back on the rails. Sometimes with a light touch, sometimes with a very heavy touch. So with that, let's talk about planning so we can see what the differences are.
So planning is definitely our more preferred approach to running games, where you introduce a story element and allow the players to react to it. It could be ignore, it could be passive interest, it could be active interest, but regardless, the players have the choice to either accept, ignore, or whatnot, the elements, and react however they see fit, and then you as the DM then react to how they react, and it's a kind of back and forth, more of like a tennis match.
Stop! We have our second Kickstarter ready to go. Check the link in the description.
Add 250 magic item tarot card to your gaming resources right now.
Mageforge are magic items from our very own games and minds ready to use in your game.
So check it out, back it, follow it, whatever it is that you need to do.
And get on that list. Stay nerdy. Sometimes even the players might actually introduce the story element or a narrative as well.
Indeed.
So again, we have our pros and cons. So with this methodology, I feel like players get a lot more opportunity to contribute to the story in meaningful ways, and also more agency possibly in the world itself around them.
And you never have to worry about the players taking things off the rails when there are no rails. The story can go wherever it is that you feel is necessary and wherever the players feel like going.
Your story becomes a lot more flexible, and your ability to adapt to what the players are doing becomes a lot easier when you're not worried about keeping them on track and sticking to a specific narrative that you've already designed.
Having the freedom to just kind of ebb and flow is definitely feels a lot better, and it allows you to be far more collaborative with the players. But with that, there's always going to be downsides to this style. And that first and foremost comes with feeling less prepared. If you don't have conversations with your players and you don't have a clue where they might go, and that's absolutely happened to me, it's like, okay, here's the element, here's where we last left off. You talked about going this way, and they're like, nope, I'm going this way instead. I'm like, what? Wasn't prepared for that one.
I find it is much harder to create epic overarching stories when you're playing this style of game. When you have everything kind of plotted out, it is a bit easier. Now, it's not impossible. You can still be a planner and you can still do this and get the players to buy in. But it is a little bit more amorphous and nebulous as to how you get to the end of that overarching story and that epic, fantasy style Lord of the Rings quest.
In order to do a planning style campaign, where your players might go left, right, and center and have that epic overarching plot, it does require you to adapt and adjust ideas of like, okay, well, I'm going to connect this thread that they talked with here at this juncture point because this happened, and then they ignored this entirely, and then this happened over here, but they didn't see it, so we don't have to worry about it, so then they happen to go here. So like you're connecting these threads to a story that you're having to create after the fact. And then hopefully once the pieces begin to fall and they're like, oh crap, there's all this big picture happening, maybe we should attach ourselves to it.
But I will say, once they do attach themselves to something of that nature, it does get a lot easier, and you're never struggling to get buy-in from them and get them to take those hooks because they've become vested. And especially if you can incorporate it in ways that gave them agency and narrative choices and elements of the story to add to, then they're so much more vested.
And of course, the downside is, for a lot of DMs, this could be a problem, is you are going to need to improv more. There's a lot of, well, I just need to create something on the fly. So whether you're using random roll charts, random name generators, or what have you, be prepared to come up with something on the fly, and it could be your entire session for the night.
Yeah, so ultimately, this becomes a linear railroady adventuring style versus a sandbox open-ended adventuring style that is very non-linear, and they both require preparation. It's just a matter of what you're preparing. With that plotting, it's very linear, and it's almost like you're writing a pre-written adventure. With the planning method, you're going to develop things in the world for them to interact with, and you don't always know which ones that they're going to choose to interact with. So like Ted said, having, lists of different things, whether it's names of locations or NPCs, is going to be super useful. Just having, a compilation of encounters that you can pull out whenever you need, or things are slowing down, becomes super useful. So you end up working on different things in the game. Personally, I enjoy the planning style better. I might just have, I might make a flow chart of what I think's going on in the world and introduce elements from that flow chart into the world and see how my players interact with it. I might show up to the table with 3 sentences written down and an idea for an encounter that I kind of incorporate those elements into the session. And with planning, most of my prep time actually happens during the session. So like during this session, I'm taking notes that become prep for my next session, as opposed to where if I was a plotter, I would have done that all beforehand. And, the players don't really get a whole lot of input into that. I mean, you can kind of incorporate things from your players into it, but it's not the same as taking the choices that they've made, the things they've said at the table, and the actions they've done, and, using those as your building blocks.
No, we've got, decades worth of experience at the table. And in the early days of D&D, sessions typically started, you're at the entrance of a dungeon, you go in, you do the dungeon, however many sessions that takes, and that's the adventure. D&D has evolved over the editions and over the decades to become, a far larger thing, a very drastic and different options of styles.
More narrative.
More narrative. And you can do a dungeon crawl, or you can do, a entirely, we're going to have this campaign is just conversation. And all of that is great. Anymore, I tend to have more planning with occasional plotting moments stuck in my game. But most times I'm like Dave. I have a handful of sentences written down, maybe an idea for an encounter, but I'm also familiar enough with the rules that I can kind of pick something on the fly. Yeah, every once in a while, I'm, not thrilled with, I'm going to have you fight a giant radish monster. I don't know where that came from, but it totally happened in a session, and I felt wonky during and after. But hey, planning, sometimes you go improv, and sometimes the improv is not exactly your best.
Who did you beat up with a radish monster?
You guys.
Did we fight a radish monster?
You did. It was...
D&D gets so weird sometimes. Maybe I was traumatized by the radish monster. Where did the radish monster touch you? And I've totally stricken it from my mind. But yes, weird, strange things can happen when you're improving in particular. But you know what? The truth of the matter is, no matter what method you use, more than likely you're going to end up improving at some point. That's why we've kind of gone in that route, because just from playing a lot of games and seeing that happen over and over again, we just kind of went, oh, this is how it's going to be. Yeah, instead of resisting it, we just leaned into it. But it's just a matter of like what works for you. What makes running games easier for you and more enjoyable for you and your players. And sometimes you might have to match up a style with a group. So, not every group meshes for that reason. Let us know down in the comments what you think. Are you a plotter or a planner? What's some of your best GM tips? Share it with the Nerdarchy community in the comments.
While you're down there, don't forget to do all the fun things that make Nerdarchy and YouTube happy. Like, share, subscribe, even go ahead and attune to that notification bell.
Quick reminder, Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, we drop new videos here on the channel, so come on back. But you can't wait till then. No worries, we got you covered. Up here, there's a card. D&D Session 0. Make your D&D games awesome for your group.
So until next time, stay nerdy.